Good evening. A warm welcome to our museum members and to viewers turning into our live web broadcast. My name is Kate Levy, and I'm a founding member of the 9/11 Memorial Museum Visionary Network. This evening's program is presented as a complement to the exhibition Drawing Meaning, Trauma and Children's Art After 9/11, which is now on view downstairs in the museum. The exhibition examines how young artists from around the world use art to heal themselves and others as they express complex thoughts and feelings about the attacks. On September 11th, I was 10 years old when I lost my dad, FDNY Lieutenant Joe Levy. I remember feeling confused and overwhelmed and trying to understand what was happening to my family and our world. America's Camp provided a community, now second family, that showed me I was not alone in my grief, a place that led us to no longer be the 9/11 kid, but rather find the light through the darkness, and like many here tonight are familiar with, dance like no one is watching. These incredible art projects at America's Camp that we will learn more about tonight were a way for myself and others to not only help us process what we had gone through on 9/11, but more importantly, a means for us to express hope and resilience that we all channeled from our loss and each other. America's Camp personally had a huge impact on me as I embarked to become a mental health counselor to reciprocate the love and healing I received to other children dealing with trauma as they learn how to navigate their world. With that, we now turn to tonight's program, which will explore the role of art making and art therapy to process grief and trauma with a focus on America's Camp and the World Trade Center Family Center. Traci Molloy is a Brooklyn-based artist and educator. For over 20 years, she has directed art-based educational outreach programs across the country. She was artist in residence for 5 years at America's Camp, where she created several large-scale multimedia collaborative art projects with campers. Her collaborations with young artists have been exhibited at institutions across the globe, including the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Pentagon, Tokyo's Children's Museum, and here at the 9/11 National Memorial Museum. Amy Gardner is an Oceanside, New York native. Her father, FDNY firefighter Thomas A. Gardner, was killed on 9/11 when she was 9 years old. Her family regularly attended programming at the World Trade Center Family Center in Rockville Center, Long Island, and events hosted by the organization Tuesday's Children. Amy also attended America's Camp as a camper and counselor. She's currently an associate producer for See It Now Studios at CBS. Dr. Tom Demaria is a clinical and school psychologist with over 30 years of experience responding to the needs of those who've experienced traumatic events. He was the founder of the World Trade Center Family Center in Rockville Center. He is a member of the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement and an advisor to the Coalition to Support Grieving Students. We are incredibly fortunate to have these panelists with us this evening, and I'd like to thank them for being so generous with their time and insights. Please join me in welcoming Traci Molloy, Amy Gardner, and Dr. Tom Demaria in conversation with Executive Vice President of Collections and Chief Curator, Dr. Jan Ramirez.
It's so nice of you all to clap before we've even opened our mouths, but thank you. Keep it coming, please. Well, first and foremost, we're incredibly pleased this evening to have an opportunity to talk about the framing of this new exhibition downstairs called Drawing Meaning, which represents a curated dip in a much deeper sea of the museum's very diverse holdings of art created by children in the aftermath of 9/11. I just wanted to share a couple of statistics with you to start with, which is that according to the federal census in the year 2000, there were about 72.1 million people under the age of 18 residing in the United States at the start of the millennium, and that statistic expands exponentially when you add children who are living in countries elsewhere and in other time zones. What they unfortunately soon had in common was the intrusion into their childhood of a globally witnessed and felt calamity that had to be reckoned with. I mean, 9/11 became its inescapable shorthand. And while the 2001 terror attacks occurred more than a generation ago now, their repercussions continue. I don't need to tell any of you that. And yet there are now 100 million or so more Americans too young to have any lived memory of those events. So tonight we've set aside this opportunity to discuss the impact of 9/11 on this especially vulnerable community of young people, those who shared the identity of having lost their loved ones on that terrible Tuesday, often a parent who was also the parent of the family's primary wage earner. That hard truth is reflected in the composition of our panel tonight, and we'll soon have a chance to chat with them. Before we start, I want to just dim the lights a little bit, or they don't probably need to be dimmed that much, and deploy this clicker. As the moderator, I get to do that, and offer this kind of supersonic flyover of the exhibitions downstairs, which some of you actually may not have seen yet. It's organized around a loose chronological arc, beginning with the ubiquity of witness that children experienced on and after September 11th, some having seen the attacks unfold in real time, sometimes in lower Manhattan and from surrounding vantage points, most absorbing these images, these shocking images, through the filter of global media and internet coverage, particularly the horrific visual timestamps that were specific to the World Trade Center catastrophe, which news channels replayed for days and weeks and months thereafter. And even if this footage somehow went unseen by children, they could nonetheless imagine the spectacle by osmosis. They overheard descriptions of it, and they sensed the alarm of the adults and older siblings around them. So we begin the exhibition with a nod to the art emerging from those bewildering images and the related fears and anxiety they generated. From witness, the subject matter transitions to sort of the next phase of meaning making. Who did this and why? Are we safe? Is this over? What does it mean when someone is missing or when someone is found? What's a terrorist? Will this newly declared war on terror affect my family, my friends, my future? Soon, however, we sense the backstage presence of parents and teachers and psychologists and counselors maneuvering children away from the trauma of September 11th and refocusing their interest on the new dateline of September 12th and the reparative steps underway to manage and recover from the catastrophe. Kids take agency through art making, which becomes a form of art of aid giving, really. They dip into that sort of deep wellspring of empathy to create pictures of comfort for those who are grieving. They compose morale-boosting messages for the helpers of Ground Zero and at the Pentagon. These responders soon cut to the head of the line in their pantheon of superheroes. They're figured as firefighters and police officers and paramedics and backhoe operators and iron workers and National Guardsmen and Red Cross volunteers. Across the country and overseas, children then begin to devise symbols of support, slogans of solidarity, which they integrate into their pictures and address to the President of the United States, the mayor, the people of New York City. They address them to the wounded, to the displaced, to all the dear heroes, which definitely included search and rescue animals at Ground Zero. In fact, we've acquired quite a subset of canine fan mail, if you could call it that. We also take a pause in the exhibition to credit the adults in their lives for just furnishing craft supplies and posting all that surfeit of goodwill to the intended recipients. As cleanup operations neared the finish line, children began to illustrate what might replace the towers and thwart future disasters. They pitched all manner of schemes for achieving a safer, a kinder, a more unified world, abundant with sunshine and rainbows and peace symbols and giant Band-Aids that could mend broken buildings. And we let these pictures percolating with optimism and happy endings have the final say, because children do dare to have happy endings. They have that port of hope in their sight lines just beyond the horizon line, which adults may never reach, but in spite of everything, we seem to be hardwired to seek. On the screen, you actually see a drawing from a very large cargo of children's art forwarded to New Yorkers from the D-Day Memorial and Museum in Normandy, France. I'll conclude just by saying something about our collection. Our collection here at the 9/11 Museum is actually a collection of collections, plural. The drawings, paintings, murals, cards, collages, quilts, folded paper cranes, and other material expressions in the show and elsewhere found their way to the 9/11 Museum, usually through the efforts of what we would call interim caretakers, holders of this material that were unequipped to preserve, catalog, and professionally store these archives in the long term. These depositors of record were very typically relief organizations, neighborhood associations, faith groups, volunteer coordinators, responder agencies, and overwhelmed firehouses. Multiple donations were transferred to us from schools, near and far, including from elementary schools, middle and high schools that were in session in New York City on September 11th. That morning, more than 1.3 million students were in those classrooms when the World Trade Center crisis began to unfold and intensify. 41 schools were open and operating south of Houston Street, their respective occupants watching the world change around them abruptly from front row seats. 25 downtown schools were evacuated, some of those communities forced to then outrun the dust avalanches from the collapsed towers. And in the exhibition, we actually do include several examples of response art made by this particular cohort of students upon their homecoming. As the collector, the museum usually knows more about the histories of these contributor groups than we do about the creators of the work preserved in these compelling archives. In and soon after 2001, most of these artists would have been legal minors. We have no associated records of their proper names, no knowledge of their personal proximity to the events of 9/11, although we suspect that the exhibition will very likely bring some of those backstories to light. However, this is not the case with donations from the World Trade Center Family Center and from America's Camp, because sadly, the connections of these young artists are known and very intimate, because the names of their parents and their grandparents and uncles and aunts and guardians edge the two memorial pools outside. So now we have this opportunity to speak with Amy and with Tom and Traci about the function and therapy of art making as these family members try to emerge from grief's undertow and resume their adolescence and childhood. So let me shift over here if I can. I'll keep my clicker. And maybe we will begin, if you don't mind, Amy, with you, and maybe just tell us a little bit about your story and your connections with these two entities.
Sure. My name is Amy Gardner. My father passed away in 9/11 as a firefighter. I grew up on Long Island with a brother. I was 9, and he was 6 when my father passed away. And shortly after the attacks, we went to the Family Center. And then in 2004, I attended America's Camp.
Okay. You wrote something. It's embarrassing when we always do the research and go back. But you wrote something in 2007, which I thought probably rang awfully true, maybe not in the particulars, but in what you had to say. And you said, growing up, I thought of my family as perfect: 2 working parents, a boy, and a girl, a minivan, a house in the suburbs of Long Island. I never believed that anything bad could really happen. And I think that sort of stands in for the shock of September in a way, pulling in. But we'll go back to you in a moment. And I'd love, Tom, for you to tell us a little bit about the origin story of the World Trade Center Family Center.
You mentioned the word shocked. I was called to the emergency room because the TV wasn't working. And as I looked at the TV, it went blank before I saw an image of the towers with smoke billowing out. Didn't know what that meant, but stepped outside. We began to see the plume in the streets from the city. Was then called to the emergency room at the hospital because people were coming in with fantastic stories of buildings falling. And volunteer firemen later that evening, I had done some late night consultations, had glass shards and cuts all over them. And we didn't know what was going on, what was happening. We were all stunned. And we couldn't believe that this had happened in a lot of ways. And then we started to get reports from the local towns nearby that there were cars left in parking lots, and they weren't picked up. And as a hospital, and as a head of behavioral health at the hospital, we didn't know what we should do. So fortunately, there was an empty store that the hospital had, and we said we need to open it up as a refuge or a respite center for people to come in. And we thought it would be a trickle, but it started to get more and more. We started to get hundreds of families in the center, which we miraculously opened within 2 weeks of the Trade Center attacks, with volunteers, with dedicated therapists and volunteers trying to give a place the family to be together. And we didn't want it to turn it into a therapy center. We wanted it to turn into a center where families could be with other families and families could help families. And that was really our motto, is families helping families, building community, not turn everybody into patients, keeping them as people, keeping them as a community. And we had some wonderful leaders from the families to really help run the center. And that really became what the center became. And art, and we'll talk more about that later, we realized that it was hard for the children to put into words, like, what's terrorism? How do you explain to a 9-year-old what terrorism is? How do you explain what hate is? How do you explain what death and loss is when people hadn't experienced that loss? So we found art, again, as a way for the children to begin to talk in their way about what happened. And it was a way, I think, we were able to get the children to feel they were trying to get some mastery of the experience. And proudly, the center lasted for about 10 years. Working with people like Amy, and I promise not to embarrass you, but Amy was quite a leader at 9 years old at the center too. And we'll go over her exploits in a little while.
And I just didn't want to, disconnect your previous background and your ongoing background, because you were no stranger to helping communities that had been through these horrific, distressful, traumatic events. And we were just chatting before about Flight 800, when that went down on Long Island, that you were pulled in to help there. And I know later it was, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy. And then, unfortunately, the school shootings in Newtown, Connecticut.
Yeah, my career, it fell out of the sky when the Avianca plane crashed. And if you guys remember that in Cove Neck, Long Island, we didn't know what to do. There was no real disaster work or crisis work supporting families. So started to realize we needed to do more to help families and help people get together. And since then, I've responded to hundreds of disasters around the world, and every place from Parkland. I was at Parkland a couple of days after the shooting, Newtown, places like that too. And I really believe empowerment, which art can do, and also empowering families to give them knowledge and information and helping people not become overwhelmed, which is pretty easy in the sight of such disasters. But
So, and Traci, now, if you don't mind, maybe giving everybody just a summary of the America's Camp formation and duration.
Hi, I'm Traci Molloy, and I get the privilege of explaining what America's Camp is. And I have to also add that I see so many former America's Camp campers in the audience, and it just makes my heart feel so full right now. So America's Camp existed for 10 years. It was founded by 3 individuals, Jed Dorfman, Jay Toperoff, and Danny Metzger. And they were camp directors at their own respective camps. And it was designed for kids that lost a parent or guardian on 9/11 or a sibling, and also for individuals whose parents were first responders that died in the line of duty. They were sort of invited to the camp as well. And I was the artistic director or visiting artist at the camp. And in that capacity, I created 5 large-scale collaborations in 5 consecutive years. And then I came back the last year, and actually Amy and I worked on a video project together at camp. And I'm very proud that all 5 of our 5 consecutive projects are in this museum and are also included in part in this current exhibition.
Yeah, again, I found some quotes. But actually, we do oral histories at the museum, and this came from an oral history we did with Jay Toproff, the camp director. And we asked him to summarize the whole. Use the mic. We asked him to summarize the sort of the hold of America's camp, and he said, "You may leave America's camp, but it never leaves you." And then later he said he likened America's camp to Never Never Land without the pirates. But he had a particularly poignant quote that he remembered one of the campers had said to him early on, and that was, "I survived for 51 weeks so that I could live for one." Mm-hmm. So I thought that was great. One of the things we wanted to do was to actually show you some of the sort of differing work that came out of these 2 places, and maybe you'll remember some of them, maybe you won't, but I'm sure the audience will then remember them. So maybe we'll start. I think we're going to start, Tom, with the World Trade Center Family Center, and maybe with this absolutely amazing. In this case, it was a print or poster that came from, I think, one of the earliest art projects. And I remember when I first met Amy and she was here down in the gallery and we had this on view, you said, I think my brother and I helped to paint this, but do you remember, I think it's like the Seasons of Grief, but maybe you'll remember the purpose.
Yeah, actually the art therapist who actually helped put it together, Bonnie, is sitting there. She led the directive with the children. We realized that after 9/11, we were so consumed with the violent and harsh images that the children, kind of had those kind of images keep being re-experienced. But the other part of it was loss, tremendous loss and grief and sadness. And grief is a lot of emotions. It's anger too. It can have a little fear. It can have guilt, what you didn't say, what you could have said, regret. But that's a lot of emotions to really talk about. So we didn't want to focus totally on the trauma piece, the fear element, and certainly that was there, and it was repeated, again, as you mentioned, on the media and by us all, because we're all kind of stunned by that. So this directive was really important because we wanted to help the children sort of have a sense of where grief goes, And if you look at the first tree, it's the fiery part of grief. It's the fall, it's the leaves falling. And the next one is the snowman grief. It's the starkness of grief. If anybody here, obviously, has experienced grief to some extent, but that kind of dark part of the whole grief experience. The spring of grief is when you start to get some feelings back. You're shifting focus on the death to focus on the life of the person that you lost. And the bond is still continuing. And the last piece is sort of the rebirth in terms of keeping that image and that bond together and with us. So symbolically, this became a teaching point. It was something that was a directive that the children participated in with their art therapist, but we felt it was a nice messaging, and this became kind of one of the cornerstones of our center, that grief is all part of the process, and not just the loss of a loved one, but also loss of other things, because as you know from any loss, status, economic, livelihood, safety, a lot of things get thrown away in terms of being afraid and being vulnerable. So we wanted the children to see that there is hope. There's a way through that cycle, and that series of paintings became that symbol for us.
One of the things that I'm struck by, and I was when I first saw this piece, was the fact there's only one tall tree, because it's really about the sole surviving parent, I'm assuming, and that this, the smaller trees are the children and the community coming around the tall tree to help. So to me, it's tremendously empathetic kind of conceit as well.
And the other thing, whether it was the intention or ended up that way, the trees kind of bend toward each other in the last panel, if you see. you can see the other panels, they're a little bit pointing the other way. They start to lean in a little bit. I'd like to think that that's a decision that the children were making, even though they couldn't express it, that the family and that one parent that they can rally behind can help them through this part of the process.
You know, when I think about it too now, it's sort of the resetting of time, because this nature cycle begins in the fall. It doesn't begin, you know, in the fallow winter or the spring or whenever, you know, typically it begins. It's really remarkable. Another one here.
This is this person, Amy. I don't know if you guys know her.
Let us have the light if we can get it on. There we go.
I have to, I won't embarrass you too much, Amy, but for a little one, and so I hadn't seen Amy in a while, and Mom must be very proud of her too. She helped really get us focused on other parts of the meaning-making process. And before we talk about the art, she created a prayer wall at the center. And I asked you, why'd you do it? And he said, it just seemed like it was necessary. It was needing to be there. But we found children putting prayers to whoever. It didn't have to be a deity, but it was a wish or a prayer for the future. It was a way to connect with something bigger than the horrible images and the pain they experiences. But for a 9, 10-year-old to do that, it always struck me that you had just tremendous vision and insight to put that together. And it was something that I marveled at. So it's an honor to be here with you. So I didn't embarrass you too much. The other piece is something that helped us understand that parents were under a lot of pressure. It's hard to support a grieving child when you're grieving too. And although you do your best, and I admire all the parents we work with who are so heroic and would bring the children in and try to meet all their needs, but Amy really expressed it. I'm trying to make my mommy feel better about my dad. I know someday she will feel better. That children sometimes cared so much about their parents that they wouldn't share that they were hurting inside. And they had pain too. They didn't want to burden mommy. They didn't want to bring things up. And that really alerted us to the fact that we got to push more for the children to express all those painful feelings, and that's okay. And that mommy or dad was okay with that. And this let us know that there's another dimension to the grieving process, and that's to make it okay that you don't have to be strong. You can be weak to be strong, in a sense.
You know, one of the insights that people have shared with us about the work of the World Trade Center Family Center was the particular predicament that young adolescent girls found themselves in, where the father had died and there were other siblings in the household, and they had to kind of step in to be the mother so that the mother could be the father and, you know, take care of everything the father had taken care of, and including getting, you know, if they had sons, the right athletic equipment and getting them to the right sports, you know, arenas and the right time and so forth and so on. And that it was those adolescent girls really took on a role that was challenging and robbed them a bit of their life on top of everything else.
No, it's a fantastic point, because I think when somebody who's a key part of a union in a family and they're gone, the family gets disorganized and the structure gets taken apart. So we made a decision. We had to relieve some of the pressure on some of our teenage girls, and we brought other family members in. So we expanded it to aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-parents, in-laws. We had everybody there. We didn't just leave it as that nuclear family. Although the family supported each other, we had to expand it more. And that really became a way to relieve some of the pressure of children to be adults, because we still want them to be children too, and that was important.
Amy, do you remember making this piece?
This one, not as much, because I was probably 9, so my memory is a little faded, but I do remember doing a lot of projects like this. My brother and I went to the Family Center, I think, almost every day. So making art like this was by the dozens, I think, for sure. But yeah, I do remember it. I just don't remember making it.
You know, when we showed Amy this piece the other day when you came in, and I don't think you'd seen it since, you know, it had left the Family Center many years ago, and, you know, putting on my, you know, art historian's hat that reads way too much into everything. I looked at it and I said, oh my God, the purple nail polish, it's got to be purple bunting from a firehouse. You know, is that what you meant? And of course you were like, what? No, but so I'll try to erase that from my curator's notes.
I think
It
it's
is
probably because
speculated, but not confirmed.
I probably wasn't allowed to wear nail polish at the time, so this was probably my only
much more,
yeah
much more
output to
compelling
nail
answer.
polish.
Okay, now we'll correct the
Very
curatorial
meaningful,
notes
yeah.
on that one. I think we have another one. So this one is very profound. And
This is a very poignant drawing. It was actually shown to U.S. Congress at the time of one of the anniversaries to illustrate the corruption of childhood. And in this lovely drawing drawn by a young boy, you see the baseball diamond. His father was a coach. But you also see the religious symbol, the crucifix, symbolizing death or the afterlife. But there was no person there. And again, I think it was this child trying to struggle with the bond, that there's always going to be the bond of dad being my coach, dad tucking me in at night, dad being there for me, but dad's not here anymore. And that contrast between the national pastime, baseball, and the symbolism of death, we thought that really typified what struggle young people were going through in terms of trying to sort out what that absence meant in their lives. And also the continuing bond, that we know that bond continues. The physical presence of a loved one is not necessarily there, but the bond is so important. And this really illustrates that in a lot of ways. You can view it as it's sad because there's symbolism of death there in the afterlife, but it's also nice that dad is remembered as a baseball coach. And dad is remembered as being part of baseball. So I think that was an important piece of that drawing.
It's interesting, too, because I think, again, we were talking about the sort of reset of time, so that fall is always going to be, for a period of time, your beginning, and fall sort of heading into the World Series and, fall baseball, and forever this is going to be, sort of correlated in this child's memory bank.
I was going to, speaking of what you're saying, this also was prevalent at America's Camp. So there would be imagery, as we were talking earlier about this piece, I remember kids drawing tennis rackets in particular, because at camp they would learn how to play tennis, and many would say, oh, this is something I wanted to do with my dad. So the tennis racket would go on the piece. So for someone from the outside looking at it, they may question, why is there a tennis racket on this quilt or on this phoenix? But it was a tribute to the parent that they didn't learn how to play tennis with, or they didn't get to play throw a football around with anymore. And these conversations would so to hear that they were coinciding cross sectors is really important.
And when working with children, we realize that traumatic images, they come up and you want to forget them, but images of baseball and your dad, you want to remember. So how do you help children sort out the memories that you want to keep, which are part of the bond, and the memories you want to store away a little bit? And this really illustrates that conflict that the children could have in terms of how do they hold on to their dad? Was he the person that was killed, or was the person that continues to be in my heart and I continue to love?
I think these two we also have in the exhibition, which I'm assuming came out of a sort of an exercise prompt. You may remember them.
Yeah, we in fact the children who showed up at the center always were smiling at times, and they were happy. And part of the directive is there's the happy face, and then there's the face inside you. And you can see that the one child has got a happy face, got a big smile on their face. And on the inside, you can see in their hands and their feet, they're scared. They're scared inside. We worked with children who were in the tsunami in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you guys remember that horrible disaster. And one of the directives with the children was to draw your face, and everybody had happy. And then said, turn it around. What's the inside face saying? And again, oftentimes when children are given permission to talk about their fears, they will express their fears. And this is also an important point for parents because, parents in the room, how you doing? Fine. How was your day? Okay. But it's not necessarily okay. Well, tell me what was good about the day. Tell me what was not so good. Oftentimes you can't kind of press children about what's bothering them. You have to kind of expect that it is a deeper feeling. And this, I think, drawing really showed that a lot of the children were holding a lot of that fear and confusion about these big terms like hate, terrorism, and death that they were struggling with. And the other painting really is so true of children in general and us as adults, that oftentimes there's our daytime self, but then at night the nightmares start. Nightmares where the monsters come out. The monsters are under the bed. We hear the noise outside. all that stuff that we store and push away so deeply comes back. And a lot of children will have nightmares and not want to tell mom or dad, or not want to tell anybody because they don't want to worry them. And sleep becomes not a place where they're refreshed, but sleep becomes a place where they're tormented in a sense, because there's all this pain that they haven't expressed. It's amazing, though, I found that a majority of children, not just through the World Trade Center, through other disasters, typically in school, they're looking okay. Everything, the teacher, how they're fine in class, they're doing their work. But we do notice that they look tired in the morning, and you talk to the child and you find out they've been robbed of sleep because they're holding in those feelings so much, and that's where they kind of emerge. So this is a way to let them know that there is those feelings and to help master them by putting them out there.
You bring up a really interesting point by opening the door to school, and so I'll ask Amy, so you had to go back to school. I'm sure you took a little time off to mourn your dad, but you needed to go back to school. What was it like to go back to school with this identity, this aura sort of over your head of being someone whose parent had been killed at the World Trade Center?
It definitely feels like you have a spotlight on you the whole time. I think there was maybe one other family in our town that had lost somebody in their direct household. So I think my mom reminds me too that a lot of people remember our names even now, just because at the time we were a family that everyone was talking about. I loved going to school and I had great friends at school, but I think going to the family center after school was really helpful for my brother and I, because it was just a place where we could do whatever we wanted, talk and make art, and just kind of take it easy and know that people at the center knew what was going on.
Right.
But yeah, we weren't treated the same way with the same kind of spotlight at the family center.
And we learned that from families, that we learned that just because you had this horrible thing happen didn't mean you didn't have to do chores. Didn't mean you didn't have to do homework. And we learned that from the families, because we had offers for tickets and teddy bears and all this stuff coming in, but we didn't get any gifts, sorry. we didn't get, because we felt that was not how life works for the child. You earn, you don't just get because of what happened to you. And I think the parents really taught us that, and I commend the parents for that message, that we really helped, we think, children get back on track with working hard, staying disciplined, earning things in life rather than just getting them because of certain status. And I think the center hopefully became that type of place. Right. And you seemed like worked really hard, and it worked out well. And America's Camp helped too. So, and your mom certainly helped a lot also.
Before we get to America's Camp, just one last question, which the sleeping monster brings up, which is, I mean, clinically in your work, assuming you were seeing children associated with the World Trade Center that were having sleep disturbances. What else were you seeing that you could say was probably symptomatic and tied to this trauma?
We saw a lot of children reenacting the towers crashing. They would build towers and knock them over. Mm-hmm. They would call other kids terrorists. They would play act, acting out through play, especially the younger children, more and more. And what they did, though, is they tried to bring in fantasy. We saw a lot of games like Harry Potter. Harry Potter's parents were killed by a terrorist, so they would include fantasy. You mentioned superheroes, but they also brought in the Harry Potter imagery too, to kind of get mastery in some way, and we saw that. But we found that I can talk, anybody can talk, but having another child who's going through the experience really helped. I think made a greater impact than any therapist or anybody could do. One very poignant incident, I was with some children, they were playing Thomas the Tank Train, and they were going around. And two boys, little ones, playing Thomas the Tank. You always wonder if there's going to be a fight about who gets the caboose. So one boy said, "What are you doing?" And he pulled out a mask card for his dad. "This is my dad." And the boy goes, "I have one too." And he goes, "Okay." They put it back and they kept playing. So part of me was like, "Oh." I would think they were baseball cards, but they were mask cards. But both, the communication was, "It's okay. You're not alone here." And I think that made a difference. And it really helped the children feel that they had somebody that they can get that support from.
So we'll move from sort of the school day, community day, you got to do your chores and make your beds, to summer camp. So Traci, I'm going to pull up this first one. A little soup song of it is downstairs in the exhibition, and maybe you can share the genesis of this Pandora's Lantern project.
Actually, I'm very happy to. I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Tom was just saying, because at America's Camp, you had this merger of worlds, right, where you had this extraordinary joy. And in my life, I have not felt the happiness, the sort of the lightning in the bottle, the joy of America's Camp. And Christine, I see you out here, and I remember dancing to the music and getting goosebumps on my arms. And then you turned next to me and said, "Oh, it happens to me too." And this would be a place where, the only place in my life where I got goosebumps from pure joy. And so I want people to know this, because sometimes when we think about America's Camp, oh, this was been such a sad place. It wasn't. It was just magic and fun and beautiful. And there was really complicated stuff. So when you were talking about the play acting, there was an organization called the Center for Grieving Children, which partnered with America's Camp, and they came down, and they were so essential to helping the kids. And we had grief counselors there, and they had a room called Buddy Central. And in Buddy Central, what happened was sometimes mattresses were piled up and the kids were buried, and they would have like tubes sent below the mattresses so that they could breathe, and that they could then enact getting out from being buried alive. So these things that happened, children's play, was so that they could get out and start again and play and recreate. So these things were happening at camp, as well as learning how to swim and having MTV night and having, these sort of fun, magical things. So I just wanted to add that in as I described Pandora's Lantern. This is the last project that we made at America's Camp. And very fittingly, this is a piece about hope. So when you were talking about Harry Potter, we too were very much obsessed with Harry Potter and the magical world that Harry Potter created, and also with mythology. And Pandora was created through these three gods, and was given this box, and her curiosity, of course, she opens the box and releases all the evils and famine and war and all this awfulness in the world. And poor Pandora, she gets the worst rap, because really, she closed the box and she's left one thing inside, and that's hope. And so Zeus says to Pandora, you must release hope. You must open the box. And so this is our gift of hope to people. And so what you're seeing here, this image is lit up from the inside. And when you get close, you can catch the light on your body, and you get the hope from the children. So each image is a panel that the kids made that depicts their interpretation of hope. What you don't get from this is the audio component. So I recorded the kids saying the name of the parent they lost, and you also have a recording of what they hope for. This piece has only ever been seen once at America's Camp, so I personally am hopeful that someday we will be able to see it in its entirety in the future. And so Pandora was created with these three gods, and the hope is the gift of beauty, which came from Aphrodite. The sound is from Apollo, which was the gift of music, and Hermes is the messenger god, and that is the message of hope, which we're giving. So that's this piece.
And we tried our best to get a little light behind it.
Oh, I know, you did such a good job,
A little
Dan.
bit of a challenge in our exhibition space. I wanted to say something else before we even get the kids to America's Camp, which is that the parents had to feel comfortable releasing the children to camp. And my understanding is that the Berkshires were actually not the first possibility. It was further north, up in the Maine woods or what have you. How did the Berkshires come to be the midpoint or the agreeable location?
I'm not sure I have the answer to that question. I was not there the first year of America's Camp, and I know there are people in the audience that may be able to answer that. I just know that the camp that we were in, two camps, both were in the Berkshires, and for 5 years we were housed at Mackinac, and then for 5 years we were at Camp Danby. I don't know. your answer.
you know, my version, according to these oral histories, is that, you know, particularly the mothers did not want their most precious assets to be more than 4 or 5 hours away. And that the Berkshires, which, you know, if you had a heavy foot on the pedal, you know, you could get to in about 2.5, 3 hours. I would get there in 4 hours. Some people would get there in 2.5, but that it was sort of, let's bring it a little bit further down. And so, you know, these campsites were found. But let me continue to click here because we have the other wonderful, this is a panel, yeah.
Amy, why don't you go?
Yeah.
So this was my panel that I made for Pandora's Lantern. And dragonfly has always meant a lot to my family. I did a lot of artwork with dragonflies at the Family Center. And now as an adult, I realize the symbols behind it. Dragonflies are, for me, it was a symbol of my dad, a connection to my mom and my family. Now I realize that it's emotional maturity and transitional life symbol. So for me, it was just a little touch of home for me to bring to camp and just a reminder of my dad. And the cow print behind it was an inside joke between Traci and I. And as Traci and I have talked about this artwork growing up, Traci was a huge part for me at America's Camp. She was one of my first friends there, so for me, Traci is America's Camp to me in that way. So it was important. I don't even think I thought about it. It was just like, of course, I'm going to put Traci, some sort of inside joke with Traci in my artwork. Especially since it was nearing camp. We knew camp was ending too, so I think that was part of it, was that I just wanted the jokes from camp to live on as well.
Told her she wasn't supposed to make me cry.
That was light. I can be worse if you want.
And then we have this spectacular phoenix, which, by the way,
Can we go back for a second?
Yeah,
Because I want
sure.
to give a shout out because I see that Doc is in the audience. I see you, Sam. To the previous slide, and just acknowledge the piece that is above Amy's was made by her, and it's the waves, cascading waves, and there's hope written as the hope rises, gets closer and closer up to the heavens.
Okay.
So I want to acknowledge her piece. Love you.
And we have the phoenix. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, there's a catalog. Because as Traci mentioned, this work was actually shown at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Western Massachusetts, which was just extraordinary. And that's where I know the 9/11 Museum staff first saw it and said, yes, this material is just spectacular. How do we do this? But explain this piece.
So the Phoenix was made the year before Pandora's Lantern, and the year before that was a piece called Apollo's Ascent. And one of the young campers that year made a postcard on it. Apollo's Ascent was a series of postcards that were attached to air balloons and went up. And her image, or their image, was of a phoenix. And I asked them, why were they making a phoenix? And they just said simply, well, you know, the phoenix never dies. It lives forever. So I thought, well, I'm going to build a phoenix. So I didn't know how I was going to build a phoenix, and I built a phoenix. And lo and behold, the phoenix actually does fly. It's built in a way that it can soar across the room. And so the feathers are all based on, or they're all drawings made by the campers. This piece has over, that's okay, it has over 300, that year I think we had just under 400 campers, and we had folks also that were CITs and counselors that were former kids. The phoenix glows in the dark, so it symbolically bursts into flame, which I will just share with you. The night that we had that phoenix live at America's Camp, and the lights cut out, and the bird bursts into flames, and I could hear in the audience this collective was magic. Like, that was it. That was the greatest moment of my artistic career, was I made magic for the people I most wanted to make magic for. And they made magic because this piece exists, because of all of them. Everything that you see, all this work that I facilitated, none of it was done just by me. There were so many people at America's Camp that helped to make these projects a reality. and to collaborate. And I mentioned the Center for Grieving Children. There were staff members at camp. There were counselors. I worked with people, Melissa Chang, I want to give a shout out to because she helped me for 3 years in a row. And then all the kids, all the trust. This is all because of them. No peace was made just by me.
By the way, the first year, the 9/11 Memorial Museum was sort of up and running as a project, not as a built environment yet. We actually flew the Phoenix over to our event space for our first benefit.
Yeah, Kate and I were there.
Yeah, which was very impressive. So, but it just, glowed and made the right statement on the beginning of everything. Ready for the next?
Yes, and the Phoenix is huge, by the way. It's like 20 feet by 15 by 8. Just in case you're thinking it's like a little teeny thing. It's like a massive thing. Yeah. This piece was off of the very first project I did at America's Camp, and that was a quilt project. And what I learned from that project was very profound. So the person who made this image had written the word boobily at the top, and I didn't understand what that word was. And I thought maybe it was a misspelling. And I asked them at the time, what was this? And they started to cry. And they said, this is the name, the pet name, like the nickname my dad called me. And I was, oh my gosh, what have I done? I was just kind of like, oh, nuts. And Christine, I'm giving you a shout out because this was you. And so another young girl was in the space when this was happening. And she saw her friend crying, recognized the emotion, and did what children do. Grabbed a paintbrush and started painting on her arm, right? And so they started laughing, and they started to play, and they started to sort of chase each other around the art space. And I understood that they got it. They understood their pain on a real profound, deep way, and I had to trust them. And from that moment on, I knew each project, each year, they were going to lead me. I knew if I just listened to them and created the space, they would guide me as to what I needed to do next, because they were there, they felt it on a very deep level. This piece was made the second year. This is from the Sky Project, which started out as an 8 by 12 foot mural, which for those of you that do murals, that's pretty big, and ended up being 20 by 8 feet because the kids keep needing to make the imagery bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just want to note the piece that says, I love my dad. And so that piece, a young boy made that. And we were making, all the pieces were going on the mural. And I asked him if I could have it. And he said no. And I was like, oh, well, wait a minute, but this is what we're doing this thing, we're making these pieces, they're going on this. And he's like, no. And I understood then that these weren't just pieces of art. This was his father. This was having ownership. This was so important. And so I said, if I take and trace the piece exactly, and I give you the original, can I keep the copy? And he said, yes. And from there on out, I understood that I needed to always make copies and give the kids their piece so that they could have ownership. So when I was describing the balloons that went to the sky, those were prints. We made multiples. For the feathers on the phoenix, the kids all got to have a copy of their original piece. And for Pandora's Lantern, the same thing, so that they could create and then still be able to take home the part of the parent that they were honoring. There's the Phoenix. And I see so many of you in the audience. I want to tell each one of your stories about your piece. But I think that my panel will kill me because then we'll never have time to do anything else.
So I just explain too, my understanding is that the counselors participated maybe in the upper feathers that you don't see, yes. And that the younger campers were the artists of the feathers you do see.
So it was designed. So when you would come to camp, us adults, right? Adults, we very much wanted to protect the children. We wanted to keep them safe. And so all their feathers, all the counselors, the staff, the older folks, that's on the back side of the Phoenix, right? This part to keep them safe. But the reality is the children lifted us up. So they're the ones, they're the strengths. So the phoenix, what you see is their mark, their creativity. The underbelly is the reason why the bird soars, and they're the ones that lift all of us up. So that was my idea behind that.
That's lovely.
That's you.
I made this for the Phoenix, but it also echoes something I made at the Family Center as well. This was very similar to the prayer wall mural that I made at the Family Center. I think at the time religion was still a part of trying to figure out grief. And there was a lot of like gates of heaven imagery or words that were being said. So I know that went into this as well. And especially the dragonfly being a transitional symbol too. So I think that's why I drew it so often, is because it was something peaceful and also in memoration of my dad. And I forget the prompt for the phoenix, but I think for me this was more just like forever it's going to be love at the end of it. And I think also making the phoenix was helpful to just take a minute at camp, because like Traci said, it wasn't a place for grief. But the art projects were always a time for us to kind of just sit with our feelings and maybe make a tribute to your lost loved one. So I think this was just a nice hat tip to my dad at camp too.
This is Tony's piece. This, of all the pieces that was made at America's Camp, this piece hit me the most. When Tony made the piece, they said to me, "Can you show me how to draw a picture of a man's body?" So on a side piece of paper, I drew an outline of a male body. And then Tony said, "Can you show me how to make the man disappear?" So we took water and put it on top so the man's body started to fade. And then Tony wrote beneath, "A man somewhere he shouldn't be." And I thought, my goodness, I'm an artist that tries to make profound work, and this is better than anything I could ever make.
It's just amazing.
I still think that.
So we've actually brought you to no words, but
Yeah,
here you are.
no, sorry, I had to, I mean, Tony's right in front of me, so I'm trying to keep it together here. And this was made by a camper who, for years, did not participate in the art projects and came to me. Yes, we know who this is. And then came to me the year of the Phoenix and was deeply distraught because he felt like he wasn't honoring his father. And I said, "You've honored your father every single year by showing up, by playing sports, by loving everybody on this campus and just being the amazing person you are." And he said, "I want to make a piece of art." And he didn't want to come in when everyone else did. And so he came late one evening into the space and made this. It's amazing. This is from Pandora's Lantern. This was also made by a male camper. And this is hoping to one day be able to stand in his father's footsteps and do the things that his father did. This was also made by a male camper. This was, they believed that the family believed every time they found a dime, it was a gift from their deceased father or deceased family member. And so what you see is an eagle carrying the dime, flying across the mountains with the fire in the background. And one of the things that's very interesting is, sorry. Sorry, I was just going to say, I would see motifs, or certain kids would use imagery year after year. And so this child did this, the eagle image appeared a lot in his artwork. Sorry, Jan, I didn't mean to. Oh, yeah, that's why you were laughing. No. Oh, now I get it.
Too hard, they were laughing.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, boy, Oh yeah, look, that's Amy and I look exactly the same, just with a lot more gray hair.
I mean, it does seem that it's an extraordinary community that was created. You're all, I don't do Facebook, but my understanding is there's a very active Facebook community, very active back and forth between the campers. And I was going to also ask, because this came up in the oral histories we did with Larry Levy and Jay Toperoff and others, that there was sort of a changing of a guard that occurred, maybe 2/3 of the way through the run of the camp, where the children who had very vivid memories of the parent or the grandparent or the uncle, aunt who was killed, they've aged out of sort of being in the bunk beds. They've become the counselors, and that the littler children coming in didn't have that intensity of memory. I mean, they knew there was an empty chair at the Thanksgiving table and that there was somebody in the family portraits around the walls they couldn't quite remember. But that also provided an opportunity for the camp to sort of shift the art-making activities away from these intensely, beautifully personal, symbolic pieces to have the younger children actually make art for others who had been impacted by tragedies, whether it was or wounded soldiers or kids who had been through the earthquake in Haiti and had no books, no clothes, no nothing, and that there was that beautiful moment where where America's Camp sort of pivoted to give back to others, pay it forward in a way, which I think is really remarkable. But there came a point where you all just aged out of it, where there were like 9 counselors to every 1/9 of their camper age kid, which is really extraordinary.
Well, that's why America's Camp concluded.
Yeah.
There were no more children. So the camp existed for 10 years, and the children that were in utero were 10 when America's Camp concluded. So there was never going to be, there was not a design for camp to go on indefinitely.
Yeah. We also heard that the last camp quarters, which you may have been in for a couple of years, the campers asked if they could create a museum, and that they set aside a space, and that campers could come in and create. I think it was you designed floor tiles. Yeah, is that right? And that it sounds pretty spectacular as just its own special place. Let me see if we. All right. Well, we won't talk about this. This just seemed like, with all the talk about hope, just a nice image to end on. But I'm just wondering now, do we have time? I hope we do for questions. Yeah, because it seems like there's an audience ready to do it, and we have a mic there.
On this side and on the other side.
Yeah. Oh, there's something right down.
My question is for Amy. First of all, beautiful artwork. I wanted to know what impact creating the artwork had for you, and if it was cathartic, and what you would say to children today that may have dealt with their own loss and how it helped you.
Art was really impactful in my life to begin with, because we did art a lot in my family's home. So to be able to make art at the family center every day was really helpful, because it's just very peaceful to do. So it was just a time you could create without having to talk, which was really helpful, especially when everyone wanted to talk to you all the time about your feelings. And then when I got to America's Camp, I was very, very shy. And not that I didn't want to talk to people, but it was just very, very hard to. So art was a way for me to not be alone and isolated, but to still be in a room with people without having to communicate and talk about my feelings, but still feel like I was part of a group and a community. And then through that, it was helpful, because I think I could see how my other friends were feeling at camp, where we didn't most of us talked about our feelings and our loved ones, but a lot of the times that happened in the art space, where we were just talking about what we made and who who you lost, which it just kind of helped those conversations come along. But mostly it's just an anxiety reducer. It was fun to create something, and just be proactive with your hands too is really helpful for anxiety. So I think throughout my entire grief process, art has been there the whole time, and still in different ways now too.
Is it a sign of success, I'll ask you, Tom, this, that the World Trade Center Family Center cohort, huge, doesn't have reunions? Meaning that people have sort of transitioned to the next phase of their lives and journeys.
Yeah, the advantage of having an identity born of tragedy was the identity of coming together to get past it. But if that remains your identity, then in a sense you don't transcend that mark on your life. And it's really important to have a date where that part of your life ends. It's always an important chapter, but it isn't the book. There's other chapters for you to continue to write. And I think that messaging is so important. And for you to move on to a career and a life, and with acknowledging that sad part of your life, it's a chapter that's there, but having much more of the book to write is very important. So it is important that programs end and not continue forever, although they leave obviously a lasting imprint in your life, in our lives, by who you touch. So yes, it is. It's important to have an ending date, so to speak, of the actual bricks and mortar or the program, because it should be something that you move past.
Other questions? I think there's one right there. Charlene will bring the mic over to you.
This is a question for Amy. I know after America's Camp ended that many of you stayed extremely well connected, and probably to this day. Did you find it hard that your personal loss was a moment in history, that you had to share it globally, that it could never be a private moment?
I think in the beginning, yes. Because I think, to what I was saying in the beginning of the panel, being the only family really that we knew in town and it being so isolating is very hard, because you're just sharing everybody's grief. And since we were the only family, a lot of people that was feeling any sort of trauma could feel like they could relate to us too. And I think going to America's Camp made that, really leveled the playing field, where we didn't have to talk about it. We all came from the same place. Was really helpful for that reason too.
So we maybe one more question before. Yes. Oh, two. Okay. Yep.
Hello. My question, sorry, Amy, but this kind of piggybacks off of what Z was saying. I was curious, some of this artwork you hadn't seen in a very long time. And obviously at America's Camp and at the center, these were, again, private ways for you to cope. But now they're going to be on display at this museum. So I was just curious, seeing it now as an adult, how you're feeling, and also to know that this is about to be opened up to however many people come through this museum, what you hope they take away from the exhibit and from the artwork.
So I think with the piece with Traci and the cow print is a good example that I probably wouldn't have made that had I known it was going to be in the 9/11 museum.
Oh, God.
But I think I do think a lot of the artwork is really helpful to see, because a lot of us were alive at the time. We know what happened. Everybody knows somebody that was affected by it. But one day all of us will die, and this artwork is the only personal touch of what actually happened on that day and the legacy of our family members and things like that. So I think beyond the textbook, this artwork is a really good insight to what we were feeling and just the evolution of how we felt over time too, with especially the artwork at America's Camp. To see devastation and deep grief to the trajectory of us feeling more hopeful and happy. That if anyone takes the time in 100 years from now to look back at this, that artwork can hopefully help tell a story too.
And I wanted to let you do our wrap-up question.
Okay. It's not a question. I was a first responder at Ground Zero. And after a short time, we got cards from children and pictures and greetings, and they were at respite centers, and you have no idea. Thank you. You have no idea. Hello? Yeah. You have no idea how much it helped us.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I remember a card, and boy was in 7th grade, and he said, I really don't know much about heavy construction or cranes or any of that stuff. He says, but I do know one thing. When I grow up and become a man, I want to have courage and be brave like you.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful thing. And I will say that we have heard from many of your cohorts and colleagues who said that sometimes coming across these drawings in the respite centers at the coffee stations at Ground Zero was just the jolt of hope they needed to get their engines refueled, to get up and go back to the pile or the pit. So kids made a big difference. This art made a difference, and I think that's a perfect place. These people made a big difference, and so I think that's a perfect place to stop. So thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming.